my distance from it and looking at objects that I knew approximately what the size was. So they could crunch all the numbers through and figure out within a fairly good estimate how big the craft was. That came out to about 52 feet in diameter.
That's pretty big, 52 feet, huh?
Yeah, it was big. It was big.
And when you saw that, there must have been this moment where the jaw drops and you go, oh, my gosh. I've just...
Well, not at that time. You would kind of think of it. But when I left the bus and I saw that, to me it had the opposite effect. It said, see, I'm right. There are no flying saucers. This is just an advanced U.S.-made aircraft, and they've been testing it, and people think it's aliens from outer space. It made complete sense. And, in fact, when I walked by the craft, there was a little backwards American flag stuck on right next to the opening in the craft. Well, that absolutely does it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. So by the time I walked in, it made complete sense. This was the big new secret fighter that was going to replace the F-15 and who knows what else. And, I was going to work on the propulsion system. Yeah,
actually, it would make more sense that you would think that, especially with a little American flag. That was a nice touch.
Yeah, absolutely. Later did I learn to find out that was more or less a sticker that says this belongs to us now, as opposed to we made this.
Did you get introduced to who was to be your boss? Is boss the right word?
Yeah, kind of. It was tough to really figure out who your boss was there. They worked on the buddy system. And, what moves science forward is free discussion. It's people sitting around and working on a common problem and discussing things.
Sure.
It's just brainstorming.
Yes.
Especially for something outrageous like this.
Uh-huh.
But that was not permitted. What they did is they had a buddy system. You had one person who you worked with who you could talk to. There was no communication with anybody else, not even if you sat down for lunch.
Now, how interesting is that, Bob? Because you were talking about the atomic bomb earlier in Teller.
Mm-hmm.
And they had the same arguments in the development of the atomic bomb that they weren't they were not allowed to sit around and throw ideas back and forth, and that it was holding the whole damn project up.
It's exactly what was happening here, and all that has told me is that since the 40s, the military has not changed the way they do anything, and it's probably the reason why this project moved ahead so slowly. They were more concerned about security than moving anything forward.
And, of course, I guess they did not give anybody any idea where they got these craft. Or did they? Well,
in one of the briefings, they said information gained from the craft, and they really didn't say how, but that the craft came from the Zeta Reticuli star system, which is apparently a binary star system that you can only see from the southern hemisphere.
That is exactly correct. And the one thought to perhaps hold a possibility of harboring life, and you're right, it can only be seen from way down south. I believe it cannot even be seen from Puerto Rico, where Arecibo is. Now, that's really interesting. So they actually did say, from information gleaned in the investigation of this craft, they thought it was Zeta Reticuli.
That's how it was worded.
Okay, so to work you go on what?
Well, the first person I was introduced to was a guy by the name of Barry Castillo or Castillo. I don't know how you pronounce that name. But I was introduced to him. This was the guy I was going to be working with. And we had a moderate-sized lab, and specifically we were working on the power source and the propulsion system of the craft.
So he was your buddy?
He was my buddy that I was going to work with.
Uh-huh.
In the lab, the first day in the lab meeting him, he was a very down-to-earth guy, and what was there was a reactor moved from one of the craft and one of the propulsion mechanisms that were on the bench. So they had already removed something. Now, at that time, I had only seen one craft.
The one you described, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And as it turned out, there were 9 there.
9, right, and we'll get to that. But this portion of the propulsion system, or the main portion of the propulsion system, do you remember what your initial impression? Listen, by the way, I don't know if I'm going to press you to talk about things that you are unable to. How much are you unable to talk about, or unwilling to talk about, or will get in trouble for talking about? Is there anything that you hold back that you have to hold back?
Well, the only things that there are a couple things that I haven't said, and for a reason. It's not that, there's a new news flash or something I just want to say that's new. The only reason there are some things I've held back was so I can recognize somebody from the area. Yeah, you know how all the chats and whatnot that go on the internet, they're full of just nutcases.
I know.
And on both sides of the fence, though. I mean, you have people that will swear up and down, I never lived in Los Alamos, I never worked there, or who knows what. But on the other side of the fence, you also have people that, just because they want to support me, say that, I was a security guard or something there, and I saw Bob going to work every day. Well, both of those people don't help. because neither of them are true. And as much as I appreciate the help from people that say stuff like that, it really doesn't help, because all it does is confuse matters. And, in this field of UFO research, or whatever they call it these days, is so inundated with garbage and just ridiculous stories, you do not need to add even 1% more, because it's impossible for anybody to take anything seriously. So there were only 22 people working there.
22?
Yeah, and I have the list of them.
You have a list of the names?
Of every person that worked there.
Oh my
every
God.
person that had clearance for that. Now, that's the only thing I've kept to myself. There were a couple other little things here and there, and they talked me into releasing them in the movie, and that's fine. But the number one thing are the names. I mean,
the name, of course.
There's so many times you hear people say, well, I've got a friend that worked there. Really, what was his name? And it's never... I've never seen a name come through.
Well, when you and your buddy first saw this propulsion stuff, how did it hit you as a physicist? What did you when you looked at it, you said to yourself, I'm looking at what?
Well, the first thing I saw that was absolutely mind-boggling, and I will never forget it, was the reactor operating. Now, this is something very small, probably on a base 12 or 15 inches square, with about a basketball size sphere on top.
Okay.
Well, semi-sphere. It's,
right.
The basketball setting on the plate.
Right.
This was the reactor for the craft. And this produced a tremendous amount of energy, and also it was the source of the gravitational propulsion system, where it got its basic gravity wave from, that they amplify. Now, these are, we know what the effects of gravity are, but we cannot produce gravity or any gravity. I've spoken to a lot of people, and I ask people, you see in NASA training films, astronauts floating around. And, that's all done in that large plane that they put into a crash dive, and people go weightless inside.
Vomit comet.
Right, the vomit comet, exactly. The majority of people I've spoken to, even people that seem fairly knowledgeable to me, think that NASA has an anti-gravity device in this room where they just turn it on and people float around. Now, if we had something like that, there wouldn't be airplanes anymore. Cars would fly. Right. I mean, the world would be changed. We don't have a machine that can make gravity, because if you do, you can also control time. So if we had something like that, the world would be so different.
All right,
we probably wouldn't even be on the radio here. But